93. Welcome to the technical analysis of the Mercury Retrograde of September 26, 2021. This is a Draconic perspective. I will include the Vedic perspective in the form of a time lapse towards the end of the video. What I have before you is the astrological wheel, which shows the grand aspects on the left-hand side. And I have a chart that shows the minor aspects on the right-hand side. And towards the bottom, we have a list of all of the alignments. So if we look towards the left-hand side and look at the grand aspects, we see that it is currently a grand triune. If we look at the blue lines, so we see a grand triangle. Let me highlight it. So we see a grand triune occurring. And the planets that are involved currently are Saturn, which we see over here, as well as the moon, which we see over here. And it is being directed towards this point right here, which is the sun, which is currently conjunct with Mars, as well as Fortuna, which is an Arabic part. If we look towards the moon is also conjunct with the North Node, as well as Lilith. So if we want to understand the moon, we must understand the North Node, which represents our worldly ambitions, as well as Lilith, which represents our hidden sexuality, as well as our hidden ability to utilize our sexuality in a manner that is profitable. This is why I included a couple of extra points that are not normally spoken about, so that we can have a grand perspective. For example, we have the Arabic part that represents money here. We also have the Arabic part that represents spirit, which is here. We also have Eris here, which represents discord. And I already mentioned Fortuna, which is right here. So we go back to the moon, which not only represents our emotional plane or the subconscious mind, it also represents the public. So because the moon is conjunct with Lilith and the North Node, the public is being exposed to a level of sexuality that is really cardinal or harsh. What I mean by that is, I'm not necessarily speaking about what is going on in the bedroom, as Lilith represents sexuality outside the bedroom, really. Because the 8th house represents our sexuality as a whole. But when we focus upon the energy of Lilith, if we understand the story of Lilith, this is why Lilith is associated with sexuality, as she refused to lay under Adam in sexual union, which then made her the queen of the jinn, and sometimes the queen of the demons, or even vampires. So this energy is very clipothic, As we know, Lilith is the first energy that we meet when we enter the clip-off. So once again, the moon representing the public and Lilith representing hidden sexuality, or sexuality that is used for profit. We can understand that when we also combine this with the North Node, which can also be viewed as Rahu or Medusa, we have the combination of the moon, which is the high priestess in the tarot. The high priestess comes together with Lilith and Medusa. We understand Medusa to be about blood magic, more so the period blood from a woman. And again, Lilith represents the ability to profit off of your sexuality, which again isn't necessarily the sexual act, but your sexuality as a whole. And because this is taking place in the public eye of the moon calls us to look into our hidden sexuality and figure out ways where we can profit off of our birthright. This can go in one of two ways. What I mean by this can go one of two ways is we understand that every point has a constructive side and a destructive side. So we're going to see both energies play out on the world stage. But we have within our control to make sure that we gain or profit off of this energy that is occurring for everyone. Now, we're not going to pay much attention to the houses because the houses are based upon your location. So although we may see the sun in the 5th house, or we see Mercury in the 5th house, or the moon in the 1st house, again, all this is based upon location. So we don't have to emphasize these points, but we will emphasize the planetary alignments so that we can understand the cycles that are occurring. So once again, from the moon's perspective, we have the ability to profit off of our birthright, our secret or dark birthright. When we look towards the right-hand side and we see Saturn, which represents our world persona, or to be on the world stage, essentially to operate internationally, or to be able to produce or project your persona onto the public. Because we have our personality with people on a one-to-one basis, but we also have who we are when we engage the public, which is different than who we are when we engage people on a one-to-one basis. So we are not the same person, or the same currency is not used to communicate on a one-on-one basis versus a public basis. So because the moon is letting us in to our hidden sexuality, and this is happening on the world stage, directed towards the sun. And we understand the sun to be our soul force, which is conjunct once again with Mars and Fortuna, and closely connected to the money, which we see in the 5th house. So we see this energy is playing out in multiple points of the chart, connected by this grand triune. So because the sun is conjunct with Mercury and Fortuna, Fortuna just represents our fortune or our star lot. So the sun wants to direct that erotic energy from Mars to dig into our star lot. And the purposes of digging into the star lot or exploring our star lot or our astrological potential, because all potential is within our natal chart. The better we become in interpretation of the natal, the more we can see within ourselves, because the natal chart is simply a mirror of invisible forces. So in order to understand the invisible forces, we utilize the science of astrology with various other disciplines so that we can not just interpret but understand the invisible forces, which most likely causes all the things we see physically. So we see this energy of this Mercury retrograde, and whenever we have a retrograde with any planet, we understand that the spiritual element takes the forefront. So because Mercury is in retrograde or going into retrograde later on, Mercury wants to operate from a spiritual perspective because it is cleansing its karma. And that's why I wanted to deal with this from a draconic perspective, because the draconic astrology specifically deals with karma anyway. So because we are combining these elements of karma, this gives us a better perspective of what is really occurring. Because if we look at the Eastern Vedic alignments, Mercury will be in Virgo, which I will have to break down towards the end of the video once again. And if we look at the Western perspective, Mercury will be in Libra. Mercury is focused upon justice. Mercury is focused upon balancing the scales of thought. So when Mercury is in Libra, which is the Western perspective, so the Mercury in retrograde will be based upon either Libra from the Western, Virgo from the Eastern, or Leo from the Draconic. So in the Draconic perspective, Mercury in this retrograde will be going through the sign of Leo, which we know in the tarot represents lust or strength or even passion. So we have this lust, strength, or passion going through a Mercury retrograde, which is just aligning with everything that has already been spoken. This is a very sexual, erotic form of communication, not just with our words, but also our ability to write stories or basically read, our ability to not only write, but also read. So Mercury retrograde wants us to capitalize off of our spiritual ability to understand our sexuality. In other words, to spiritualize cardinal forces. If we can make something that is naturally cardinal and bring the spirituality towards it, we will be able to profit off of what most people just do for no profit. As we understand, most people, engage in the sexual act, continuously, or whatever their frequency is. But most of the time, it is not being done for any currency. However, because the spiritual element is occurring, Mercury wants us to capitalize off of what we naturally have. So this, again, doesn't necessarily mean that you are putting yourself out there sexually. This represents our ability to utilize the sexual currency itself and to gain from it. So we understand, people naturally do this on a cardinal level. They may show a little bit more skin than that's appropriate. Women may show a little more cleavage. Men may show a little more of their skin. So we see this happening, like that all the time. Again, when we add the spiritual frequency or the darker spiritual energy. So when I say spiritual, I'm not really speaking about angelic spiritual or religious spiritual. I'm speaking about our dark psychology. And again, this is where Lilith comes in. This is where Eris comes in. Our dark psychology, where we are not suppressing our sexuality, we are embracing it. We are embracing the darker elements of our psyche. We are learning to profit off of our dark psychology, which is normally used against us. What is normally used against us, we can take our power back. So because most people do not understand their spirituality or their sexuality, it is used against them. So when we take back our power, it can not only put money in our pocket, but give us currency to exchange on the world stage, aka spiritual resources as well as physical resources. If we zoom back out and we look at the minor aspects of Mercury, we see Mercury has a triune with Jupiter here. Mercury has a square with Pluto. Mercury has a opposition with Eris. Mercury has a triune with Spirit, and it has a conjunction with money, the Arabic part. So the positive aspects are the triune and the conjunction. So the triune, once again, is with Jupiter and Spirit. We understand Jupiter to represent divination, and because we have the spirit element combining with divination, this is divination of the deities. So to utilize our ability to tap into mythology or our inner spirit, because we are all deities, it's just a matter of tapping into our form, our divine form, our spiritual form. So Mercury with Jupiter and Spirit wants to tap into our mythology so that we can utilize our spiritual currency. We can utilize our spiritual currency once we identify our own personal myth. Because once we identify our own personal myth, we understand our strengths and our weaknesses. For example, if you identify as Pan, we understand Pan represents sexuality, to be sexually active, but it also represents, because Pan also plays a flute. So this also can represent the ability to utilize sound, the ability to utilize a musical instrument to produce certain sound waves that will cause a certain effect. So every deity has a secret science or a secret nature other than the obvious story and the obvious nature. So this is tapping into the spiritual or the secret nature of myth. Mercury has a square with Pluto. And we understand Pluto to represent our sexuality, but also our obsessions and our fetishes. And because Mercury has a square with Pluto, that means the energy needs to be reset. And this is why we have been speaking about the sexuality, because our interpretation and how we view sexuality has to be recalibrated and reconfigured. We must recalibrate and reconfigure our view of what it means to access our sexuality and to utilize it once again for profit. And that's why the money is conjunct with Mercury. And if we look at the opposition with Eris, and Eris is the goddess of discord, that means Mercury isn't necessarily looking for discord, but it may happen in terms of subconsciously. Because whenever an opposition occurs, this is energies that are outside of our control. So a conjunction is within our control, but a opposition is outside of our control because it is mostly subconscious. So Mercury is subconsciously engaged with Eris, which is discord. So discord may occur subconsciously or emotionally in a fashion that is out of our control. But once we understand the full dynamics, whatever discord occurs, we can easily negate it with the power of our own sexuality and sexual currency. With this, hopefully the Dranconic perspective is more understandable so that we can combine all three perspectives: Mercury in Libra, Mercury in Virgo, and Mercury in Leo. And we can decide what is more effective and what is more magnificent and what is occurring more so in our lives so that we can make the best decision according to the star alignments. And with that, I bear peace. 93.